I'm Emily Alfino. I'm Executive Director of the Sanibel Historical Village, and I also helped Francis write his memoir, My 92 Years on Sanibel. He wanted to call it The Old Geezer Talks. I talked him out of it. It took some doing, but I talked him out of it. This is the second Twilight talk of the season. Our next talk will be March 20th, and that's about Grandma Dot and the Ireland family.
That'll be good.
All of our Twilight talks are sponsored by Wayne and Linda Boyd, and we thank them for that very much. And I also want to thank Sanibel Catering by Bailey's for donating the wonderful desserts. Big hands, big hands. With us tonight are some of Francis's relatives and friends, daughters Ann Bailey Haggerty, Jane Bailey Ward, and Mary Mead Bailey Johnson. They're joined by longtime friend Merrill Rushworth. And of course, we couldn't have an evening about Francis without Richard Johnson.
Yes, you could.
Also joining us is Francis's brother-in-law, Keith Trowbridge. And we hope some of you will have stories to share as well. I got to know Francis late in his life. After he read an article about the store that I wrote for the local papers, he asked me to help him write his memoir. We met often in his conference room on the second floor of Bailey's store, and sometimes at his home. We spent hundreds of hours together over about 2 years. He would talk, and I would take shorthand. Lots and lots of shorthand. And sometimes I'd go for a blizzard run. I like to think that we got to be friends. I think of him as the last Southern gentleman. And he was Southern. I once mentioned the Civil War, and he corrected me quickly. It's the war between the states, he said, or the war of Northern aggression. I think he forgave me for being a Yankee, though, I don't know. Francis was born in 1921, and he died in 2013 at age 92. He was born at Lee Memorial Hospital in Fort Myers, and his brother Sam, who was born at the homestead on Sanibel, always told Francis he wasn't a true Sanibel native because he was born in Fort Myers.
He did.
His brother John was born next, and Sam was the youngest. Francis lost his mother to cancer when he was just 14. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he worshiped her. He called her an elegant, refined woman. She taught him kindergarten and first grade at home, and he started formal school with the second grade in Sanibel's one-room schoolhouse, which is now in the historical village. He went to an academically challenging prep school, Virginia Episcopal in Lynchburg, and he did well, which he said spoke well of the education he got at Sanibel's tiny school. He went on to Hampton-Sydney College on scholarship near Richmond, Virginia. His classmates nicknamed him Moon after a comic strip character, and he never was quite sure why they did that, but that's all anyone ever called him, and he was even listed in the football roster as M. Bailey. He started keeping bees 3 or 4 days a week when he was 13 years old, and he did so up until 1952, when his duties at the store took up all his time. We sell honey at the village that comes from descendants of those bees. Francis was on the boxing team, he ran track, he played football, although he said he wasn't any good at football. One year, he only played in one play, in one game, all year. He played softball, too, until age 79. He hated the term, though. He insisted a softball was really very hard. I don't think he ever said the word softball without making that statement. After school, Francis thought he wanted to travel. As a youngster, like so many youngsters, he wanted to get away. There were too many mosquitoes, it was too hot, there was no air conditioning, and there were no girls. But Uncle Sam called, and he enlisted in the Army after Pearl Harbor. He was a corporal in the Army Air Corps and held several positions in the United States during the war. He said about the Army, if it moves, salute it. If it doesn't move, pick it up. If you can't pick it up, paint it. He was away from Sanibel for 13 years during the winters, 8 years for school, then the Army, and a short stint counseling at a camp, teaching, and working in a lumber mill. He said his heart was always on Sanibel, even when he wasn't. He was back on Sanibel full-time and for good in 1948. He said he missed the smell of seawater and that he never dreamed of a white Christmas, only a white sandy Christmas. He was back working at the store at age 27, the same store that's in the historical village today. He might have saved the store from being sold because his father, Frank, was worn out and needed help. Francis was married to Pauline Engel from Captiva in 1951 at age 30. They were married in Chapel by the Sea. They had 5 children: Anne, Susan, Mary Mead, Patrick, and Jane. When speaking to me in his 90s, he still got choked up when he talked about the first time he saw Anne, his first child. Pauline died in 1964 when Jane was less than 9 months old. Various islanders and family friends helped Francis with his 5 children. He married Adelaide Edgar Holmes in 1966, and they were divorced in 1974. Francis told me he thought he married too quickly after Pauline's death. He spent 8 years as a bachelor before marrying June in 1982. He lived in the old homestead his father built in 1896. He moved to the dunes with June not long after their marriage, but his love for the homestead never faded. He told me, "A big part of me is wrapped up in that house. I feel at peace there." Francis once told me that he felt drab compared to his brothers Sam and John, that they were more colorful. But his accomplishments tell a very different story. He essentially formed the Sanibel Mosquito Control District and served 26 years on the board. He was instrumental in forming Sanibel's fire department. He was a trustee of the Lee County Electric Cooperative. He still holds the record for being on Sanibel City Council, 19 years, with 1 term as mayor. He was a charter member of the Lions Club. He served a term as president. He was a member of the PTA and a scoutmaster before he even had children. He was a board member of the Shell Museum, which sits on land he and his brothers donated. He was active in a number of grocers associations as well, and sometimes he even presided over church services. So Francis was an absolutely essential part of most of the necessities of life on Sanibel: mosquito control, the fire department, the electric company, and the city. Not drab at all. He was a chief opponent of the causeway. You probably all know that. We were down at the bay one day, and I wanted to take a picture of him with the causeway in the background. He wouldn't let me. He repositioned himself so that the causeway was not in the background, and then he let me take the picture. So that was about 40 years after the causeway was built, so he still wasn't over it. While we were working together, I sometimes couldn't help thinking of the movie It's a Wonderful Life and that other Bailey family. George Bailey wanted to travel but stayed home to care for the family business. His brother was the star that got all the attention. And maybe that George Bailey felt drab compared to his brother. The similarities only go so far, of course, but there's one other strong parallel. In the movie, George Bailey adored his family, and Francis adored his family. Nothing was more important to Francis than his family, and we're lucky to have some of his family here with us tonight. And I believe we're going to start with hearing from Anne.
Okay, I gotta see if this thing's on. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right. Okay, I wrote something, but before I even start reading this, I just want to thank all of you for coming and supporting the Historical Society. It was very important, not only to Dad, but Sam and everything, and it's just nice to see people I know and people that Dad cared about, family, friends, and especially some of our Bailey employees. But anyway, I'll start reading this now. Our dad was one of the luckiest guys I know. He grew up on Sanibel before the causeway and experienced this island in its simplest form. He met our mom, Pauline Engel, at a time that a handwritten note asking her out on a date was just the way you did it. He would address his letters to her as such, to the most beautiful girl on Captiva. It always got to her. For a man of few words, he never failed to be romantic. He worked hard from day one, working on the farm, going away to school, being a camp counselor, a teacher, being in the Army, and then taking over the Sanibel Packing Company, now Bailey's. But his best was just being a dad. Some of my best memories of him are reading to us at night, trying to fit all of us on his lap in the rocking chair, or trying to wake up Susan on a cold morning and having to resort to putting an ice cube down her nightgown to get her up. And he did that for many years, trust me. He would write us letters on stationery or napkins, my favorite, just to say hi or just to tell us he was trying to stay awake in an Associated Grocers meeting. His penmanship was not the best, but I loved his notes and letters because it could take days to decipher his handwriting. He loved ice cream, strawberry shortcake, and it had to be made with biscuits. And Mary Mead always made the best. Of course, there was really no dessert he didn't like. He also loved his friends, and Dad had quite a few friends, but one in particular I must mention, Joseph Feeney. I really think he was one of Dad's best friends. They met later in life, and I mention Joe because those two got together and they were always laughing. They played golf, Dad not very well. They played liar's poker, we'd dine out, drink Pouilly Fussé, and most of those were done at the Nutmeg House, which is now the Sandbar. There was always a joke or a story. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is when I think of Dad, as I do every day, I hear Joe's laugh and I see Dad shake his head and grin. There was always that shaking his head and that little grin. In a nutshell, he had a home, his Sanibel, his family, his desserts, and his friends. He died at 92. What more could you ask for?
I'm too much like my dad. I probably don't need this. Can y'all hear me? No. Okay.
Is this thing on?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. That's what you had said.
Is it on? Can you hear me now? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jane Bailey Ward. I'm number 5 of the first set of children that we have up here. Well, I'm actually number 3 now because we're missing the one that goes here and the one that goes here. But I live in Atlanta now, so I came down here especially for this. So thank you all for showing up and coming here. It means a lot to us that you all still care enough about him and to want to know about him. Just puts a little lump in my throat that you're here, and so thank you all for that. Yeah, Dad talked about the good old days all the time. He used to, we suffered through years of listening to him tell the same story over and over and over and over. And at that point in our life, we didn't really like him. But, miraculously, over time, those stories sort of turned into, interesting, often hilarious stories of what it was like to live on Sanibel. And that was a really unique place to grow up. And I grew up here, too. But it wasn't the same as when Dad grew up here. It was a whole nother place, even though it's the same place. It looked different. There were different people here. They did different things. So we heard all those stories all of our life. Dad used to tell stories about hitchhiking from here to Virginia, where he went to school, and he also went to college there. And I thought that was awesome. I tried it once. It didn't go over very well. I actually made it down to Dunkin's before someone called the store and let him know that I was hitchhiking. Yeah. Or he would be hitchhiking back from leave from the Army or to go to a baseball game. They went all over. They went to Cayo Costa. They went to Fort Myers. They went to Punta Gorda. They went all over to play baseball. He also told us stories about missing the last ferry out to the island and having to spend the night somewhere. Sometimes they slept on the beach. Sometimes they got a room at a boarding house. But if you miss the last ferry, TS, you're in trouble. Tough stuff. He also told us stories about his brothers, Sam and John, and him, and he would catch loggerhead turtles and eat them and sell them. And I thought that was pretty gross, especially by then they were, I think, endangered, or they were under conservation, so that wasn't a good story. Also about how quiet life was on the island. I mean, you didn't have generators, you weren't indoors, and it was just quiet, and I always thought that that was interesting. And also, he would talk about unique characters that lived out here, that visited the island, that preferred a life outside the norm, like moonshiners and outlaws, fishermen, pioneers, poets, artists, inventors. They were all out here in those days. Yep, and the Cuban fishermen. A side note, he actually spoke to Thomas Alva Edison when Thomas Edison was out here picking goldenrod. He was doing a rubber sample. He thought that that might be something that would go into some kind of, he and Firestone were working together, and Dad met him and talked to him. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, tonight I'm going to tell you a story about my dad. It's called The Beekeeper and the Volunteer Firefighter. So my dad became a beekeeper when he was a young man. There's a reason why, but that's kind of not fun story. Just there were bees out here, and he started working with them, and he really enjoyed it. And so he started a business selling honey. They would sell honey mostly to the businesses in town, but they sold it in the store. They gave it to neighbors and used it probably in the house because it was sweet. You know, it was delicious. He tended the bees several times a week, go out there and check on the production of the honey and the health of the colony. And if some of you may know that when you check a beehive, you have to have a smoker. And a smoker is a can that's about this big, and it's got a bellows, and it's designed to generate smoke by the smoldering of various fuels inside of it. So you pump it, and it makes the air and puffs the smoke out. The smoke calms the bees, so the beekeeper can inspect without getting too many stings. Well, Dad used burlap soaked in oil as his fuel, and he called that wick. So one very hot and very dry summer day when he was just still a young man, about 14 or 15 years old. Actually, no. I think he was probably a little older. He wasn't that young. He was probably in his late teens. He said he went to go check on his bees, and the bees were particularly active that day, so he had to pump on the smoker for quite a while. And it made the wick run out a lot faster than he expected. So he put the can down in the grass and went back to get more wick. Well, the can is very thin, made of tin, and did I mention that it was very hot and very dry? So what happened next was there was a fire, and the fire started near our homestead, which is Periwinkle and Donex, and it burned south all the way to the river. Back then, the river used to run all the way south. I'm trying to think of a road that it ran south of, but it was, north of the beach. Yeah, well, it ran pretty far south, all the way to kind of near the lighthouse. So it burned south to the river. Yeah, probably around East Gulf Drive. Oh, it did. It ran a little bit north of that, of East Gulf Drive. Correct me if I'm wrong. So let's see. So as usual, when there was an emergency, the island people came out. I mean, they came out in droves. That's what you did back then. And they came out with their shovels and rakes and burlap sacks or whatever they had, and they worked on putting the fire out. So took them a while, but they were successful, and they managed to do that. So after that, all the weary, hot firefighters retreated to the homestead to catch their breath, drink some tea on the porch, slapping each other on the back, laughing that there was nothing really happened, and how thankful he was that no houses burned, and basically getting grief for, starting a fire. So an interesting fact about why no houses burned, it may seem miraculous, but a lot of homesteads back then didn't, they cleared the vegetation around their homes for fire prevention and also to keep critters out of the yard. So it was mostly shell there, so when a fire would come up to it, it usually didn't burn. Also, Sanibel was relatively wide open with very little vegetation. It didn't look like it does today. And if you go into the Historical Society, you'll see pictures. Next time you go in, look at those pictures and look behind what you're supposed to be looking at in the picture and look at the landscape. It was just wide open.
See all the way to the Gulf.
Yeah, you really could. Yeah, you could see all the way to the water. So that's another reason why, it didn't burn very far, it just went down to the river. Of course, Wolfert had a lot of trees up on that side, but not down here. And also, when the hurricanes came through and there was storm surge, the salt water would, kill whatever was growing. So whatever burned on my dad's fire was just like old fallow farmland, wax myrtle, salt grass, salt bush, and grasses. Anyway, there they were back at the homestead, drinking tea, resting and congratulating themselves, feet up, smiles on their faces. And my dad said he looked up and his stomach sank. He was looking south toward the river, and he saw a huge black column of smoke. So he said he couldn't talk. He just sort of pointed and grunted until his friends noticed what he was pointing at. And right there south of the homestead where the Island Water Association is, like right across from your house, is that the Island Water Association? Yeah, right like east of Donex. Yeah, right east of Donex. There was an old, unused, untended packing house, like an old barn, and it was on fire, and it was burning pretty quickly. So they all jumped up and kind of ran toward it. Unbeknownst to them, the wind had obviously switched or moved, and I think the fire probably went south over the river and then maybe had come back. So they thought they'd put it out, but it actually came back. And the other firefighters and Dad didn't realize that, so that's why they were drinking tea with their feet up. So there they go, they're fighting the fire. And it was then that Dad noticed the wind had picked up, and the wind was kicking the fire up, and it was moving east toward the lighthouse. Yeah, I'm not used to my island again. I have to get used to it. So a few folks grabbed their tools and they jumped in their trucks. They thought they'd try to get ahead of the fire and try to put it out by getting in front of it. And Dad actually said that he was in the truck and the fire was moving faster than they were in their car. So it was really hauling fast. So and he was really scared. When he was telling me the story, he was just hanging his head talking, because you could tell he was just still embarrassed or ashamed that he did this. So that now they had a serious fire. And then more people came out, probably really the whole island came out, and they worked for hours putting out the second fire. It burned from Donax all the way to the mouth of the Sanibel River. So the Sanibel River actually stopped south of Periwinkle, or north of East Gulf, right there before the lighthouse. So the fire actually burned up to it. Other than that, they wouldn't have caught it. So no houses got burned again. No people got injured. But he said when he got home, he got quite the scolding from dear old Dad. He was pretty upset. And I think the thing that's the most interesting to me about this story is his description of Sanibel at the time and how it looked. It was just so foreign to me that there were barns, there was old fallow farm fields, there was wide open spaces and shell rock. That's not my Sanibel. That's not what I grew up. That's not how we remember our island. And for us, a lot of the island has been drained for mosquito control and flood control, and so the Sanibel River is different. It doesn't look the way it used to. So he actually got a picture and showed me a picture, and there's some really great ones in the museum as well. Yeah, you can see aerial photographs where you can actually see where the river used to be. So that's my story of how Francis Bailey burned down half of Sanibel.
Well, I'm the middle child. It's a tough spot, even today. And I don't really have a story per se, but just some quick facts about him that people might not know. And we are very flattered that so many people came out to learn about him. It's very flattering to us. He had a great sense of humor. He had a pet name for everyone, at work and at home.
You want to tell what yours is?
Merle the squirrel. No, I don't think I want to do that.
Myrtle the Meadle and Skinny Minnie.
He, one thing he did not like was technology. And I didn't realize how much he abhorred technology until I started working at the store. He refused to use the intercom for the most part, and he would bellow at Marie, whose desk was probably across maybe, what do you say, about 150 feet.
Not within bellowing distance.
Not within bellowing distance, but it made it quite noisy upstairs. He did not like the beach. That was very perplexing to me as a child. I'd always try to get him to come to the beach. And I said, what is it about the beach you don't like? Well, yeah, it's the sand. and it's the water, and it's the sun. And I said, okay, got it. He absolutely loved cats. At one time, I think we had about 30 cats that we fed on our back porch. And they knew that was where they ate, and they all came up and ate in the morning. And, he just had an enjoyable time. A lot of them were feral. Most of them were not tame. But he loved food. He loved strawberry shortcake. He loved coconut cake. He did. He really did, except for pickles. Don't put a pickle on his plate.
Anne has inherited them.
Right. He did not like ice in his water. He liked Sanibel water out of the tap, no ice. Do not put ice in his water. Of course, he abhorred cold weather. If it got below 80, he had a parka on and a hat and socks, and no cold weather. He had lots of little sayings as well, and I'll just give you a snippet. Like, he would say, "Grandma was slow, but she was old," if he was waiting for you. Or slow as molasses in January, and then quick like a bunny. He had that for one of the receptionists at work, because she could sort of predict what he was about to do, because he would mumble it before he got ready to say it. So it worked out.
It worked out.
One thing about the bees is I remember distinctly every Sunday after church we'd go and check on the bees. And he swore that they wouldn't sting you. No, not gonna be a problem, but every Sunday we would all get at least one sting. I don't know why we kept going back, but we did. We really, and that's really sort of all I have. He was just a wonderful person and a sweet person, and I think, I remember him, he would do anything for anybody. Yeah. And I remember that about him.
Hi, everybody. I want to add on to the bee stories. We were out one day, and we came back. It was in the big van. I don't know if we'd been to Fort Myers or where we had been, but the bees had come and swarmed all over the mailbox. Yeah. Does anybody remember that? And we get there, and so we're all scared, and at least I was. And he comes, and he sticks his hand in the mailbox somehow, and he got all the bees on his arm, and he walked slowly over to the nearest tree, and he put them all in the tree. And I really don't think he got stung. No. It was amazing. just totally amazed by that. So,
Start how you knew it.
well, okay. The Bailey family and the Rushworth family knew each other because my mother, Milbrey Jenkins, eventually Rushworth, and Pauline Engel were best friends. And Mom and Daddy ran the Gulf View Inn up on Captiva when I was little. I was maybe 4 or 5 at the time. That's where, what's the name of that restaurant? Mucky Duck. Excuse me, I always forget the name. That's where the Mucky Duck used to be, or is now, where the Gulf View Inn used to be. And I remember I was coming home from their house, and I don't know how old, whatever age, 4, whatever, and I had on these red Ked tennis shoes that I had borrowed from Ann, and they were awesome. And that's my first memory, I think, of Ann. And we've just always, we were at each other's houses, of the shoes, yeah. We were at each other's houses all the time, and we just all grew up together, and it was pretty awesome. Yeah. And Aunt Pauline was my godmother, and I remember her babysitting for me once at Sanibel, and I had this little green, you remember those little green turtles? I don't know, when I was little.
Oh, the little.
I don't know what they were called. I don't know what kind they were, but I had one and it disappeared. I don't know what happened. I don't know if I did it. I have no idea. I don't remember, but she was babysitting me, and I remember that. My story that I'd like to tell is along the vein of the nicknames that he had for all of us. I lived in Virginia for 3 years, and I was working as a travel agent at the time, and I was in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, in sort of a fan travel agency. And Mary Mead and Richard were getting married, and Adelaide Edgar Bailey at the time had called and booked a bunch of rooms for folks that were coming to the wedding. And Uncle Francis called to give, payment for it. And he calls, and this girl who worked with me, her name was Claudia, I don't remember her last name, and she had a very southern Virginia accent. She says, "Merrill, are you Merrill, the squirrel?" And I'm like, oh! I was sort of mortified, but it was funny at the same time. So that's my big story. It was fun, yeah.
Keith,
My name's Keith Trowbridge. Is it on? Maybe they can't tell.
It is on?
Richard, while I've got you up here, let me tell you this. You've been running the store for 14 years, and Francis would be proud of you and the family and how you're keeping the Bailey store open and doing a great job.
Pete, thank you very much, but I get a whole lot of help from family and a wonderful staff.
Good. I always believe in going home with the girl that you brung to the dance. So I want to introduce a couple people. First, my daughter back there, Heather. Put your hand up. Stand up, honey. She's such a beautiful girl. She's still single, if any of you guys are.
Go, Keith.
And my beautiful wife, Doris. Doris, will you stand up? There she is. And of course, her sister from Winnipeg, Sanibel, June Bailey. I just have a few comments on stuff that I remember from Francis. Of course, June was married to him for 32 years. And so you can imagine we had many, many family outings together during that time. But one of the things I heard somebody say that Francis only played in one game. Let me tell you the story of that game. Francis was not the athlete Sam was, so Francis always sat at the end of the bench. And he sat there, and the game would go on. He'd wait for the coach to call his name. Finally, one year, he's sitting down at the end of the bench, and the coach yells out, "Bailey!" So Francis jumps up and runs up and says, "Yes, coach?" He said, "Take off your shirt." What do you mean, coach? Well, give it to the quarterback. He just has his torn off. Now, some things that Francis liked and didn't like. He liked the Lions Club. He loved playing Liar's Poker before and after. If any of you have played with him, he loved that game.
I think there's some players in the room, Keith.
Oh, are there? Anybody that played Liar's Poker with Francis? Okay. Francis met my wife's sister in a place we used to call Cheers, Scotty's Pub. And now called Jack Rana. Now I know it's closed. But Francis met June there, and after the place closed up, Doris invited him back to our place, and June and he and back to our place. And we had a piano then, and we had some sing-alongs. But by 4 o'clock, Francis was still there talking to June. And we had to explain to him that we went to bed at Sanibel midnight, 9 p.m., so it was time for him to go home. But he decided also, we said, you should go to Winnipeg. We've got many Canadians here? Okay, well, Winnipeg, you know where it is, Winnipeg. Anyway, Francis said, we said, we're going to go to Canada, to Winnipeg. Want you to meet some of June's relatives and some of your now married relatives. Have you got something warm to wear? Well, he said, yeah. He said, I used to be up in Virginia. I had a coat up there. I haven't seen it for a while. So here you have us waiting at the old airport. Remember the one on 41? And here comes Francis. We could smell him before he got to us. It had mothballs on it. We finally had to hang it out in the air in Canada at 20 degrees below zero to get rid of that mothball smell for a while. Then, let me see. June, after they got married, if any of you were ever at Francis's office, you saw a desk that was heaped high with paper. And so when June got married to Francis, she thought she would do him a favor and straighten up the desk. Well, I'll tell you what. It was awful to hear him talk about don't ever touch my desk. I know where everything is. It might look like it's in disarray to you, but I know where everything is. So he was known for, and his dad the same way. If you've ever seen pictures of his father's desk, if it's straightened up, they took the picture when somebody else was at it. He loved little kids. He loved animals. He never, ever took a dog for a walk. He took the stock for a walk. And he hated the bridge. He just, as far as he was concerned, they could blow it up and go back to the old ways. That's about it that I can remember. Is Barbara Freeman here? There she is. Francis told me, Keith, don't wait till you're 92 to do your bio. Do it before then. So I just turned 82, and Barbara is helping me write my bio. So all of you wait for the movie to come out. She'll be playing the lead in it. Richard, it's yours.
That's it?
That's it.
Emily, is it my turn?
Yes, sir.
So I have the distinct advantage of, I guess I'm going last. And as you probably saw me up here, I was jotting a few notes down as the rest of the folks were talking because they triggered memories. And by the way, they're all good memories. So I'll bore you with a few. I understand there's a few fact checkers in the room. So I'm going to have to be careful. And you know, one of the things that comes up, brings up is that I'm going to share with you, I worked together for a few years with Sam and Francis both. I had the absolute time of my life with those two gentlemen. It was so much fun to work side by side with them. And Francis, who's read his book? Oh my goodness gracious. I got a whole room full of fact checkers in. Francis's book, and in tribute to your dad, I'm going to do this in stream of consciousness because that's kind of how I took my notes. But that's exactly how he wrote. Emily, how in the world you ever put that all together, I'll never know.
Thank God for my shorthand teacher.
Because he jumped all over the place. But Francis was I heard a lot of these stories, but Jane, you caught some new ones. I hadn't heard some of that. Very good. The stories that you read in his book, I've read the book. It's been a little while since I've opened it, and I think now I'm going to go home tonight and open it back up. But when Francis would tell one of his stories, it was exactly the same every time he told it. What you read in the book that Emily helped craft is exactly, I can read that book and it's like, yep, I remember that story. And it's told exactly the same way. Now, let's go to the other end of the scale, and you'll have his brother Sam. Sam, Francis used to say about his brother, Sam never let the truth get in the way of a good story. I'm going to fess up right here and now. I'm a little bit more like Sam than I was Francis when it comes to storytelling. But somebody tonight, Keith, you talked about his desk a little bit, and you mentioned June cleaning it off. June, I had a similar experience. I did not know that about you, but I moved a piece of furniture in his office one day. Let me lay up the story. We had a staff member that had a fall, and so we needed to make some adjustments in her work environment so that she could, for those of you who have dealt with workers' compensation insurance, you'll understand this. We had to get her back at work. I see some nodding heads. We had to get her back at work as soon as possible. So one morning before Francis came into work, I relocated a piece of furniture from his office because it was the perfect height for this person to work. Well, it was his computer desk. And we're going to talk some more about that too. He found, I can tell you exactly one time when I knew without question that my father-in-law was really mad at me. And it's amazing because I'm sure I did quite a few things that aggravated him over the years. But you did not mess with things in his office. And I tried my best to explain why I did that. It didn't matter. You don't mess with Francis's office, so I get that and I understand that. While we're on the desk, I'm not in the office with him, or no, he's at home entertaining June. And he calls me at the store one day. Richard. By the way, he's bellowed at me before as well. He said, I need you to get the papers out of my office. And I immediately went into a panic. Okay, where are they? He said, go into my office, sit down in my chair, and pick up the phone. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can follow orders. So I go into his office. I sit down in his chair, which, by the way, his chair is still sitting in his office. And while I sit in that office, it's still his office, his name's still on the door. And so I sit down, I reach over and pick up the phone. Okay, Francis, I'm sitting in your chair. He said, take your left hand, fully extend your left hand out straight in front of you. Okay, right straight out in front of me. He said, now put your hand down. Okay, I put my hand down. And I'm thinking, what is this man talking about? He said, look under your hand. The papers that I want you to bring me are under your hand. And there they were. So yes, he kept a very messy desk, but he knew where every single thing was on that desk. And Keith, I understand why your sister-in-law got in so much trouble when she came in and cleaned up.
He asked me to help put his office in order.
He had no idea what he was doing. Another quick story while we're still in his office, okay? And I'm going to get, and here we go, stream of consciousness, because this is how it comes out. All the way at the other end of my beloved father-in-law had passed away. And a couple of things were very important, and some of the ladies spoke about this. Military service was very important to him, very important to him. And he, when he was laid to rest, he wanted military honors. And so my wife and I had been spending a lot of time at his and June's house in the last few months of his life. We got to spend as much time as we could with him, and I treasure every day of it. But the undertaker from the manager of the funeral home calls me, and he said, "Richard, I need your help." And I said, "Certainly, what can I do?" He said, "We can't locate military records for your father-in-law." And he shared with me that it was very important that he be buried with military honors. Without those records, I can't do that. And he said it will take weeks or months to get that done, and we don't want to put it off that long. So I said, okay. Once again, my voice was probably shaking at this point because I had to go back in his office and go through his things. So we began to go through his office, and I think you were part of that. Mm-hmm. You were in there. Your cousin T, Sam's oldest daughter, T. Ann Bailey, was in there. Who else was with us?
I don't remember, but we weren't in there very long.
No, but we were looking for all kinds of stuff.
I know, but that.
We went through everything we could find, and we just could not find any evidence of his military service. So I called the funeral home director and said, "I am so sorry, but I know he served. There's no question about that, in the Army Air Corps, and then was honorably discharged from the United States Air Force. I know there's records here somewhere." So a little bit after I made that call, I said, we'll keep looking, but I don't think there's any hope we're going to find them. So I think you were there with me, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
We were in the office, and for some reason, and I will share that I think it's divine intervention, and there's a couple of things I'll share with you tonight that I think happened that way. But for some reason, I looked on top of the file cabinets. For those of you who've been in his office, you know there's row after row of file cabinets. And the ones over to the far right are very old file cabinets, and as you move, they get a little bit newer. But I see this manila envelope, this obviously discolored manila envelope, no marking on it whatsoever. And remember the story about the hand? I was guided once again. I look up there, and I just said, I wonder what this is. So I pick up this manila folder, open it up. Everything about his military service was in that folder. There were pay records. There were where he signed up for military service in the Air Corps. There were his training, his designation, and his honorable discharge papers were in there. I was absolutely thrilled. They were crispy. They were so old. But we managed to get those, and we did I believe we had a big copy machine in there with a fax machine and everything, and we faxed a copy of that to the funeral director, and he was able to secure. So June, you'll remember this, and I know the kids do too. We had a little private service at the homestead, and a couple of young men from one of the Air Force bases were there to provide military honors. And I get a little choked up about that because I was so glad to be able to do that because I know how important it was to him. Let's go to happier times. And it actually occurred on this stage. And I call it Sam and Francis Speak Out. Anybody here that night? It was a number of years. Yeah, there you go. So there's a little story that leads up to that. And it goes back to the Lions Club. And the Lions Club sponsored, I believe the official title was An Evening with the Bailey Brothers. And so we got together and they asked me if I would help. I guess I was the moderator, if you could. There's no such thing with Sam and Francis, but anyway, we were coming up, and the date and time was coming close for this to happen, and it was much like this. It was a sold-out crowd for the auditorium here at the community house, and so that afternoon, it's about 2 o'clock or so, and I go into Francis's office, and I said, Francis, I'm really concerned about tonight. He said, what do you mean? I said, what are you going to say? And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, don't you think we should have a plan? And he said, I guess so. He said, we'll get Sam in here with us. No, I take that back. We did say we'll get Sam in here. And when we told Sam what we were doing, Sam said, well, I can talk about anything. All I got to do is ask me questions and I'll talk about anything, which is absolutely true, because you ask him a question and, Sam never met a microphone he didn't like. So he just ballyhooed the whole preparation thing. So we let him go on, and I told Francis again, I said, I'm getting really nervous. I said, that's going to be a room full of people, and I don't want to look like a blooming idiot up there. So he and I sat down in the conference room, and we started I just started asking him a few questions. This is before he wrote the book note. So, we didn't have a resource of information to go to. And so we started going through, and I said, well, why don't you start with the family making the transition from Kentucky to Sanibel? And so he said, yeah, that's a good idea. And we jotted some notes down and just kind of tried to do a little bit of an outline. And we'd been at it for about 15, 20 minutes, I guess, and we had a pretty good start. So we had actually closed the door of the conference room. Well, next thing you know, Sam comes barreling through the door. What are y'all doing? What are you talking about? Do I need to be in here? And so we said, well, yeah, come on in. And we explained to him what we were doing. So the funniest thing about it is Francis would say something, well, we ought to talk about the bees. And then Sam would start to tell the bee story. And now, folks, I think that night started at 6 o'clock or something like that. It's 5:30. And we say, okay, Sam, stop. We're just coming up with topics. We're not going to tell the story. Folks, we could not stop him. We tried our best. We never could stop him. I don't know if you happened to be there that night. It was a really fun night. If you didn't happen, maybe you saw there was actually a video done, and is still out there today. I think I still have a copy. It's at the library, and it's A Night with the Bailey Brothers, isn't it? Deb, you were there. That was a fun night. So who talked about the Girl Scouts?
I think we were only allowed one story each. And
Honey, I hate to tell you this, but I got pages.
that's what I'm afraid of, these poor people.
We still have the question and answer.
Right.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
I don't think Richard Johnson ever met a microphone he didn't like either. That's what I'm seeing.
Emily, do I have time for one
It
last
is girls
quick
against
story?
boys here.
So on a serious note, and I really did have a whole page full of
No.
on a very serious note, I loved my father-in-law. I love my, my beautiful wife and my 3 children who are sitting here in the front row. And I thank the Lord for the decision He made to bring my wife into His family and to support her in her wishes and what she wanted to do. Because one of those things was she ended up traveling to Virginia and going to school for 3 months at a little community college that I was a student at. I won't say I was studying very hard, but I was a student. I saw this beautiful young lady with long blonde hair walk across the parking lot. And I came from a small town as well, and I knew a lot of people, imagine that. And I asked all my friends, who is that? Who is that? And nobody knew her. Mary Mead was a very quiet person. She was very studious, exactly the opposite of me. And I said, I've got to meet her. I absolutely have to meet her.
He said those words to me.
I did, didn't I?
They were
Meryl
out there.
plays into this story in several occasions, but I've been limited to just one last story. So, but I did meet her, and I'll be honest with you folks, I fell madly in love with her right away, and I've loved her ever since. And so anyhow, I learned a great deal from my father-in-law. And just across the board, business, I still remember this date when I was talking to him about coming in and joining the family business. Because I'm the outsider, I'm the son-in-law. And he asked me the question, what do you know about the grocery business? I said, not a damn thing. But he taught me a great deal, and the most wonderful part about the whole thing, it's not about the grocery business, it's not about his time that he served with city government and the other many boards and such that he served on throughout his years, and the folks that he worked with. It's and the best thing I learned from him was it's all about the people. And honest to goodness, I did not realize at the time that he was teaching me. But I'm so glad that I paid attention, and I'm so glad that my family and I now call Sanibel our home. And I share it with all you people here in the audience tonight, as well as many others. Thank you very much.
We'd like to have some Q&A now, if I can figure out how to get the microphone around the room. Yes. Anybody?
Oh, yeah, there we go. It's David, right? David, Mary Mead, I can't stop. He asked me a question.
Okay.
So, okay.
Oh, I think it's funnier what Mary Mead felt.
I'm trying to think here. Yep. I was in the library studying, and he kept coming in there thinking, acting like he was studying too.
I was a very good actor. I did. I
think he finally said something like, I'm going to go for broke here. Would you go out with me? And I thought, I'm real busy. I've got work, I've got school, I've got a lot going on.
Sound familiar, kids?
Okay.
No, what she left out is I asked her out at least twice, and she said no each time. So finally on the third time, I said, look, go out with me one time. If you don't enjoy yourself and you don't want to ever talk to me again, that's fine, but give me one shot. And that's all I had was one shot, and here we are 35 years later.
I wanted to reiterate that's the way it really went down, Richard, because, I remember, you're not embellishing there.
Did moonshine ever have anything to do with the island?
No.
Did you have any moonshiners here? Is that how Bailey's made all their money?
for sure and certain. Absolutely. Y'all know who it is.
But if you look in family history, there was a fair amount of intolerance for alcohol
Yes.
in the family. As a matter of fact, Francis said that the demise of the original family business, the tobacco business, I think Emily mentioned, was a result of poor management and maybe a little bit too much John Barleycorn.
Questions? Well, does anyone have a story they want to tell about Francis? We
Well,
told them all, did we?
I'll take up a little slack here just for a second. One of the things I really, my name is Ann, and I have, about 16 years ago, I moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And one of the interesting things that I found out, I kind of knew about it, but I didn't, I guess, just really put it in context until I moved to Louisville. But the Bailey's General Store started out on the bay. And right next to it was the Tea House, which is now part of the Historical Society. And the Matthew family that started the Island Inn, well, Granny started the tea room that was right next to the general store. And the really interesting thing about this is that I did not realize, well, I knew it, but I just didn't put two and two together until I moved to Louisville. But the Matthews family came from Peavey Valley, which is probably 10 minutes from my house in Louisville. And it's just such an interesting thing, how things come full circle. To start out in Sanibel, and now I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, where the Matthews family that started the Tea House and the Island Inn, and then the Bailey family was, there was a part of from northern Kentucky, I'm trying to remember. But anyway, but they were also from Richmond. But anyway, it just is really interesting. So now I'm up in Louisville, Kentucky, and reconnecting with part of my dad's other side of the family. And it's almost kind of like Sanibel. You blink and you miss it when you go through it. And he and June came up one time, and we found the cemetery, and we were going through all the old gravestones of Shalata, Matthews, and Granny, and everything. So that was just a little bit. I thought, well, I'll just throw that out there. But it was, I mean, it's just so interesting how you start somewhere and you end up here, and then all of a sudden you realize you've come full circle. And we all grew up before the Causeway, and
Not me.
well, okay, not Jane, but my gosh, we would have full run of the island, and Mom and Dad didn't care. They would like, okay, just make sure you're home for dinner, and that was really about it. I mean, it was just so beautiful, and there were no cell phones. My God, my daughter can't even believe that when we were growing up, we still had a black and white TV. I mean, when we got our dishwasher, that was like amazing. And, you know, we just consider ourselves very lucky to have grown up on this island and been able to share some of the same things I think my father had, you know. And no matter the changes, he loved every single moment on this island and everybody here.
Well, if we,
Ever meet your grandfather?
No, he passed away before, now, my grandfather on my mother's side, yes, but not my grandfather on my father's side. So. and-
Frank Bailey.
Yeah, Frank
Frank
Bailey.
Bailey died in 1952.
But,
My father's our father's father.
My mom's father was Engel, what was his, do you remember his first name?
John.
John, but, and actually, where Jensen's is now was Twin Palms, and that was our mother's father's place. They moved from Ohio and came down here, and like I said in my little thing, my dad would, I came across letters many years ago when Dad was still alive, where he would handwrite letters to Mother Pauline asking her out on a date. And they had a phone, but he, you know, like, it was one of those open things, you know, everybody could hear you. And so but he would ask her, yeah, he would ask, the letters, I mean, were so incredibly romantic. I was just like, oh my gosh, if people would just remember that a handwritten note, how important that is, even to this day. And the fact that I found them, we still have them, I think some of our generation, our younger generation, don't forget to write stuff because we hold on to it. You know, it's so important for history sometimes to hold on to those handwritten things, because somebody's going to dig it up and go, oh my gosh, how cool is that? You know, so anyway.
Debbie.
I have a question. I want to know when Francis got that generous spirit, or where he got the generous spirit and the social responsibility to the island. Because when I came here 20 years ago, I sat on the board here at the community center and was lucky enough to serve with him. And I saw that from the very beginning, but I don't know when the family knew that that was part of their lives too.
You know what, from day one.
You know, yeah, I think that,
We never did not know. That was always just a part of our life.
I think when when the city incorporated, and he knew what a good thing we had. I don't know if any of y'all know, but they had this island, they had it planned out, Lee County. They had the roads. I mean, like Islandton Road, that was gonna be just a mess. I mean, your mom was furious. And I think that when the city incorporated in 1974 and they all got together, they knew that they had to be the ones to do it because nobody else was going to do it. Because there was other people. I mean, they got lawsuits from people because they wanted to come out here and build, and they had to fight. And so doing all those things, I think that what I remember from Dad, it was his community spirit, because if you're not going to do it, who's going to do it? And he wanted to make sure that where he lived was a place where, you know, so, I mean, that was just, what?
No, when you're done with it.
I'm done.
No, you're not. Oh, my God. Well, no, I was going to just add that growing up here before the Causeway, and there were literally only a handful of families. And I remember where the post office was. Deb, I can't remember that road, the little post, well, Ferry Landing. And it would run down to the Gulf. And I remember on Sundays like the Islanders would get together and have like this big cookout. It was like every Sunday you'd get together once, yeah.
Kinsey Park,
So, oh, was it? Okay.
Kinsey Brothers.
But, I mean, it was just a sense of community. Before it was ever any kind of, like, even a sense of responsibility, it was just people getting together to communicate and help one another. And if you needed something, you know, it just...
Dad used to say if businesses weren't open, like on Sunday, he'd say, I guess they're not hungry enough. You know, I mean, that was his philosophy. You stayed open, you provided for the community, you provided for the people. He took a big responsibility, or he took a lot of responsibility on himself, that it was important for him to be open. It was important to be open, and Richard and Mary Mead are still doing that. They were open the next day after the hurricane came through here. You know, that's just, I mean, that's something that's important. I mean, you serve your community however you can. All of you all are doing it too. I mean, I think that a lot of that came from his dad. I really do.
You know, to follow up on that, one of the things that he didn't do, he didn't talk about a lot of the things that he did.
Right.
We
did it.
I think as a family, we've discovered some of the wonderful things that he did and some of his contributions to the community. But he never boasted about the things that he did and the contributions that he made.
Richard, over here.
Hey,
One,
Ty.
one story that I remember about Francis was back in 1978 or so. We were packing the newspapers, the Island Reporters, and a bunch of us, I think, Deb, you were with us many of those Thursday nights where we... Yeah, we had to pack all the newspapers into the bags with the people's address so they could be mailed off to everybody all around the world that were getting the Island Reporter. And Francis came by, and he knew everybody that we were sending those newspapers to. He just literally knew, oh, I know these folks. They do this. They buy eggs or whatever. He knew them. They knew what they shopped. They knew their families and everything. So just wanted to share that about Francis.
I just had 2 points about Francis. When you came here on the ferry, you had to go to Bailey's store because there was nowhere else to go to get groceries. And I have to thank him because I actually think he handpicked my family. He had a terrific sense of humor, and I think he would gauge you. He would actually test you. And he and my father were great, great jokers, and they would always joke around. And I really think he's the reason that my family came here, is because Francis kind of handpicked us. But I have to say that when I was a kid, I thought that Francis was the mayor. We weren't a city yet. You know, we weren't a town. We were just a community. But if someone had asked me who's the mayor, I would have said Francis Bailey. Absolutely. But about the desk has always been an issue, always. And way back then, when the store was on the bayfront, one day someone with Francis tidied it up a little bit. And my parents made him a certificate that they hung on the wall that was the Clean Desk Award. And I remember my mother cutting a star out of foil and signing it from the President Bon Ami and the Vice President Ajax.
Before I thank our panel, I want to put out a reminder here. The Sanibel Village's Gala fundraiser is on February 19th here at the Community House. There are invitations in the back of the room, but you can also just call me at the village and sign up. So we hope we see a lot of you there. And now I would like to thank our wonderful panel. I'm so grateful they were all here. And let's give them a round of applause.